Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Downfield podcast. As always, I'm your host and football aficionado, Jeff D. Thank you for listening to the show today, as I will be breaking down the AFC East over the next 45 minutes or so. If this is your first time checking out the Downfield podcast, then you've missed the first 4 episodes, and you've got some downfield watching to do. The first 4 episodes were all about the NFC as I broke down each division, going in depth with player performances, player additions and subtractions, coaching changes, draft picks, schedule predictions, all that good stuff for the 2024 season. This is a very exciting time of year in the NFL and for NFL fans because we are just about to get into August, which means preseason football. We've got the first game coming up relatively soon between the Chicago Bears and the Houston Texans. But before we get into any kind of preseason football, let's go ahead and get into this podcast. I hope that you all enjoy the show that I have for you today. Now that we've closed out the NFC, let's move on to the better of the two conferences in the NFL, which is the AFC. As mentioned earlier, I'm going to be discussing the state of the AFC East today. This should be a very interesting division, to say the least. Aaron Rodgers is back for the Jets, but for how long?
Go!
Josh Allen's been stripped of all of his receiving weapons, except for maybe Dalton Kincaid.
Oh, come on!
The Dolphins gave Tua a very generous contract extension, all things considered. And the Patriots, well, they're going to be a complete shit show.
Language.
I'm going to discuss roster moves made in the offseason, rookies drafted, coaching changes, and go through each team's schedule to give you an accurate prediction of where they will finish the 2024 season. As always, please like, share, comment, subscribe to whatever social media outlet that you're watching this from or listening to this from. I'm on Facebook, X, YouTube, Spotify. I do have my own site as well, www.downfieldread.com. You're going to want to follow me everywhere because, let's face it, I'm humorous and I know football. So, if you're looking for some inside information or inside scoop, if you're planning a fantasy draft or you don't know, how your team is going to be for this year, I can give you that kind of information. And that way, if it's going to be a bummer of a season, you can just skip it. You don't have to pay for 8 different subscriptions to watch all your NFL games. You can just be like, screw it, they're going to suck anyway. Or if they're going to be great, hey, I gotcha. I'm also trying to get this podcast and channel off the ground so that I can do some contests and some giveaways and give back to you guys. So please give me your feedback. In advance, thank you for taking this downfield read with me. Today, let's get into the AFC East. Let's start by taking an in-depth look at the Buffalo Bills. Last year, I predicted that they would finish the 2023 season at 10-7 and second place in the AFC East, and they did just a little bit better than that, finishing 11-6. I had them losing in the wild card round to Kansas City. Instead, they decided to lose in the divisional round to Kansas City. Weird, huh? Had them in the playoffs. Kansas City lost. Yeah, that happened. Their strength of schedule last year was 6th easiest in the NFL, facing teams with a combined winning percentage of .471. This year, they have the 6th toughest schedule, facing opponents who last year had a winning percentage of .516. At quarterback is Josh Allen, who threw for 4,306 yards last year, which was 4th most in the NFL, with a 66.5% completion rating, which was 11th. He also threw for 29 touchdowns, which was tied for 5th, had a QBR of 69.6, which was 3rd, and a passer rating of 92.2, which was 15th. His passer rating was so low because Allen also threw 18 interceptions last year, which was the 2nd most behind Sam Howell, who is no longer a starter, no longer on the same club, and has reportedly been awesomely inaccurate this preseason with the Seahawks. 18 picks was also the most that Allen has thrown in one season in his NFL career. These numbers beg to question, should Josh Allen be considered a top 5 quarterback? No, he's not a top 10. He is a top 10 quarterback, but definitely not a top 5 quarterback. And I can't imagine his numbers are going to look any better this year after losing Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. At running back is third-year back James Cook, who rushed for 1,122 yards, which is good for 4th in the NFL, at 4.7 yards per carry, which was 8th. He had 66 yards per game, which was 11th, with 6 20-yard plus rushes, which was 12th, but only 2 touchdowns. Yeah, only 2. Expect that number to go way up, though, this season, as I foresee the Bills becoming more of a rushing team than a passing team just because of what their wide receiver room looks like. On a side note, every other running back that had 2 touchdowns or less last year also only ran for 700 yards or less last year. At wide receiver is where the Bills shook things up in the offseason. Last year, they had Stephon Diggs, who had 107 receptions, which was seventh in the league, 1,183 receiving yards, which was 13th, and 8 touchdowns, which was tied for 8th. He's in Houston now. Say bye-bye to Stephon. Then there was Gabe Davis, who had 45 receptions for 746 yards and 7 touchdowns, which was tied for 18th. And he's in Jacksonville now. At wide receiver 3, last year was Khalil Shakir with 39 receptions, 611 yards, and 2 touchdowns. This year, he's still on the team. Is he wide receiver 1, though? Maybe. The Bills drafted Keon Coleman with the 33rd overall pick in the second round this year. And so far, he's looked pretty damn good in training camp. Last year at Florida State, Coleman caught 50 passes for 658 yards and 11 touchdowns. Will he be the number 1 in Buffalo this year? Or, haven't mentioned Curtis Samuel yet, who was with Washington the last 3 years. He had 62 receptions last year for 613 yards and 4 touchdowns. Seeing as how Samuel has never accumulated more than 851 yards in any season, though, I highly doubt he's going to challenge that number 1 wide receiver spot. The Bills also went out and signed Marquez Valdez-Scantling from Kansas City. They signed Mac Hollins from Atlanta. They signed Chase Claypool, who's a wide receiver cancer in the NFL. He was in Miami last year. But as Steve Smith Sr. would say, they're just a bunch of Jags.
Damn!
At tight end last year was rookie Dalton Kincaid, who Buffalo drafted with the 25th pick in the 2023 draft. He had 73 receptions, which was tied for 7th for tight end or with tight ends, 673 yards, which was 10th among tight ends, but only 2 touchdowns. The Bills also have Dawson Knox, who had 500 receiving yards in 2021 and in 2022. So I would really anticipate them to do some more 2 tight end sets than what they did last year to compensate for losing some pretty damn good wide receivers from last year. On the offensive line, the Bills had a top 5 offense last year, and they played more snaps together than any other offensive line group in the NFL. At left tackle, again this year is 30-year-old Deion Dawkins, who was drafted in the second round, number 63 overall in 2017. He had a strong season last year. At left guard last year was Connor McGovern, who will be sliding over to center this year for the Bills. At left guard this year will be David Edwards, who will be in his second year with Buffalo. Center last year was Mitch Morse, who has moved on to Jacksonville. At right guard is Osiris Torrance, who the Bills drafted in 2023 in the second round at pick number 59, who was also a solid run blocker last year. And at right tackle is Spencer Brown, entering his 4th season with the Bills. As a unit, the Bills' offense finished 4th in total yards, 8th in passing, 7th in rushing, and 6th in points scored. Notable offensive players drafted this year, as I mentioned before, wide receiver Keon Coleman from Florida State, who was taken 33rd overall. Got to be honest, I never had him in my first round in any of my mock drafts, but that's okay. He went 33rd. I did have the Bills staying put at their original spot, though, in the draft and taking wide receiver Adonai Mitchell from Texas at pick number 28. So obviously wide receiver was going to be a focal point for the Bills in the draft, and they got a guy who they thought was better than Adonai Mitchell, who went later in the second round. In the 4th round, the Bills took an older running back, Ray Davis from Kentucky, who's going to turn 25 in November. He ran for 1,129 yards and 14 touchdowns last year. Looking at the defensive side of the ball for the Bills, getting back most of their key playmakers in 2024. One guy they aren't getting back, though, is 32-year-old defensive end Leonard Floyd, who led the team last year with 10.5 sacks, which was tied for 17th in the NFL, and he had 9 tackles for loss. He's in San Francisco now. However, defensive tackle Ed Oliver had 9.5 sacks, which was tied for 25th, and 14 tackles for a loss, which was tied for 16th, and he will be back, along with middle inside linebacker Terrell Bernard, who had 6.5 sacks last year, 10 tackles for loss, 84 solo tackles, which was tied for 14th, and 3 interceptions, which was tied for 25th. Not bad for a middle linebacker. DN's AJ Epinesa with 6.5 sacks, 2 interceptions, and a forced fumble, and defensive end Greg Rousseau with 5 sacks, 13 tackles for loss, which was tied for 23rd, a forced fumble, and 14 passes defended, which was tied for 9th. Not bad for a defensive end. Will also be on the Bills' front line. Buffalo runs a 4-3 defense with Rousseau and Epinesa at the ends and Oliver at one of the D-tackle spots. At the other D-tackle is Daquan Jones, who will be 33 in December in his 3rd year with Buffalo. He only played in 7 games last year due to a torn pectoral. Outside linebackers are Matt Milano, who's entering his 8th year with Buffalo, but only played in 5 games last year due to a right tibia fracture. And then there's new addition, Nicholas Morrow, who spent last year in Philly totaling 66 solo tackles, 3 sacks, and a forced fumble. The Bills are his 4th team in 4 years. At middle linebacker is, like I mentioned before, Bernard. In the defensive backfield, they have cornerbacks Rasul Douglas, who Buffalo attained midway through the season last year from Green Bay. He had 4 picks in just 9 games with the Bills. And then on the other side, they've got cornerback Christian Benford entering his 3rd year after tallying 2 forced fumbles, 2 INTs, and 10 passes defended last year. 33-year-old Micah Hyde was on the Bills last year, but he's a free agent at this point. The new free safety in Buffalo for now, though, is Mike Edwards. He spent his first 4 years with Tampa Bay and then last year with the Chiefs, when he didn't make that big of an impact, honestly. Strong safety Taylor Rapp is coming back from his 2nd year with Buffalo after spending his first 4 seasons with the Rams. And overall, the Bills finished as a unit 9th in total yards allowed, 7th in passing, 15th in rushing yards allowed, 4th in points allowed. Buffalo was also 3rd in takeaways, 3rd in interceptions, and 4th in team sacks. They were arguably the 3rd best defense in the AFC, behind the Chiefs and the Ravens. Notable defensive players that were drafted by the Bills this year: safety Cole Bishop from Utah in the 2nd round at pick number 60, and defensive lineman Dwayne Carter from Duke in the 3rd round at pick 95. Overall draft grade that I gave the Bills was a B. They had 10 picks, but 6 of them were 5th round or later. And they traded down and out of the 1st round to take a wide receiver that not have even been the best wide receiver on the board at that point. I feel like they had options there and they were trying to feel it out, but they still went with a guy. I don't know, maybe they made a mistake on Coleman. He's, like I said, he's looked pretty good, but I think Adonai Mitchell is going to be the better of the 2 out of there, so that might be a miss. Strength of schedule is tougher this year for the Bills, so let's take a look at their schedule in depth and see where we can predict them finishing the 2024 season. They open up the season with Arizona at home. That should be a really easy win. And then they go to Miami for Thursday Night Football, and I'm going to call that one a loss just because it is an interdivision game. Miami's got a strong team. We'll get into them in a little bit, so I'm going to call that one a loss. Jacksonville on Monday Night Football. That's going to be a win because it's at home. And then they're at Buffalo for a loss. They go on the road again at Houston for a loss. And then again, they've got a Monday Night Football game at the New York Jets for a loss. They come back home. Tennessee, we'll call that one a win. At Seattle the week after that, I'm going to call that one a win as well. And then they've got Miami at home for a win. Week 10, they've got at Indy. I'm going to call that one a loss. I think they could probably win that one. Those teams, in my eyes, are very evenly matched up, but we're going to call that one a loss just because it's at Indy. Then they come back home for Kansas City, and I think they're going to win that one. I think they've got Kansas City's number this year. So at the bye, they're looking at 6-5. Not terrible, but probably not where they expected to be. They come off the bye, and they've got San Fran at home, which I'm going to give them the win for. At Los Angeles Rams is a loss. At Detroit is a loss, but then they come back home for a couple of games here. New England at home is a win. The Jets at home is a win. And then they've got at New England, and I think they're going to choke that game, honestly. I think they're going to lose that game to New England. Even though they've got something to play for, I don't think New England will have anything to play for. Over-under on the Buffalo Bills this year is 10.5 games. I've got them at 9-8. Maybe that will be good enough to make the playoffs. Maybe it won't. If they get on a roll, I could see as high as 11 wins again, but that would really be the ceiling for Buffalo this year. I think they're closer to a 9-8 team. Next up is the aforementioned Miami Dolphins. Last year, the Dolphins went 11-6, and I said they too would go 10-7 along with the Bills. I did not have the Dolphins making the playoffs, though. I had them actually losing in tiebreakers, but I also didn't expect that they would have the 4th easiest schedule in the NFL either. There haven't been a lot of changes for this Miami Dolphins offense, which was one of the top offenses in the NFL from last season. So let's just take a look, see what we can expect from Miami this year in 2024. At quarterback, I mentioned before, Tua Tagovailoa, who just got a nice 4-year, $212 million extension, which makes him only the 3rd highest paid quarterback in the league. But let's be realistic. He might not even make it 4 years with the concussions that he's had. And I think that's kind of the difficulty that the Miami Dolphins had. Maybe that was some of the reasoning about not paying him as the highest quarterback in the league, is that this guy could take 1 or 2 hits and he could be done for good. So All things considered, I think that's a gigantic contract. And I will say this as a side note: all of these gigantic contracts never work out anyway. Once a quarterback needs to take 20% of the team payroll, it's pretty much over for that organization until they move on from that quarterback. It's not working for the Browns, obviously. It's not working for the Jaguars. It's not going to work for the Chargers. It's not going to work for the Packers, who just gave Jordan Love a huge contract extension. It's not good. It's not currently working, and nor will it work for the Baltimore Ravens or anyone else who has a quarterback that needs to be paid the highest in the league. It's greedy and it's stupid, which is why Brady is and always will be the GOAT. He never had to be paid the most money. He never had to be the highest paid quarterback. How well did that work out for him? All right. How many rings? 6, 7? Got it. I think Brady was onto something there, not being the highest paid so that they could actually get you some weapons and some blocking and some defense. Anyway, Tua threw for 4,624 yards, which was first in the NFL last year, completing 69.3% of his passes, which was fifth, for 29 touchdowns, which was tied for fifth, and a quarterback rating of 60.8, which was 10th. He had a passer rating of 101.1, which was also fifth. Tua did have 14 interceptions, though, which was tied for fourth most in the league. But based on last year's numbers, I think Tua needs to start being placed in the discussion of a top 5 quarterback. Obviously, what I just told you there, he was top 5 in yards, completions, touchdowns, passer rating. I think that's enough to put him really in the top 5 discussion for quarterbacks for at least this year. At running back, the Finns have 32-year-old Raheem Mostert, who had a record-breaking year in his second year in Miami last year, rushing for 1,012 yards, which was 10th in the league, averaging 4.8 yards per carry, which was 7th, with 7 rushes of 20 yards or more, which was 6th, and 18 rushing touchdowns, which was 1st. Mostert has a career 5.2 yards per carry average over his 9-year career, which is freaking amazing if you think about it. Behind him was rookie Devon Achane, who carried the ball 103 times for 800 yards, which was 25th in the league, and 8 touchdowns, which was tied for 11th. And he did that in only 11 games last year. Achane was also first with 7.8 yards per carry. Every time he touched the ball, the guy was making a big play. He was tied for fourth with 8 rushes of 20 yards or more, and fifth with 72.7 yards per game. Look for him to take more of a lead role this year. Obviously, we've got some age issues with Raheem Mostert. They drafted Achane, so you got to expect that if he can stay healthy, he's going to be taking that lead role over this year and probably into next year as well. At wide receiver, Miami has one of the best in the game, Tyreek Hill. Reek the Freak had 1,799 receiving yards last year. What's the problem, man? You couldn't hit 1,800?
Come on, man.
I mean, that was only good enough for first in the NFL. He did that on 119 receptions, which was second in the NFL, 13 touchdowns, which was first, 112.4 yards per game, which was first, and he had 652 yards after the catch, which was fourth. Jalen Waddle, who the Dolphins drafted number 6 overall in 2021, snagged 72 balls for 1,014 yards, which was good enough for 26th, and had 4 touchdowns. At wide receiver 3, they had Cedric Wilson Jr., who had 22 receptions, 296 yards, and 3 touchdowns, but he's off to New Orleans now. Replacing him is OBJ, Odell Beckham Jr., who's going on his 4th team in 4 years. Last year in Baltimore, he had 35 receptions, 565 yards, and 3 touchdowns. OBJ will be 32 years old in November, and he's already showing signs that he is washed. I don't expect him to do anything better than their number 3 wide receiver last year. Show of hands. Does anybody know who Durham Smythe is? Well, apparently, he was the tight end for the Dolphins last year, and he's been there for 6 seasons total. Who is this guy? Smith had arguably his best season last year, and that was only 35 receptions for 366 yards and 0 touchdowns, which is exactly why the Dolphins organization decided to bring on Jonnu Smith, who spent last year in Atlanta alongside Kyle Pitts and was still able to catch 50 balls, which was 19th for tight ends, for 582 yards, which was 15th for tight ends, and 3 touchdowns. Welcome to Miami, Mr. Smith, and sorry, Mr. Smythe. As far as the offensive line, Miami had one of the better offensive lines last year, but they made a few changes for the 2024 season. They still have Teron Armstead at left tackle, who turned 33 years old this summer. This will be his third year with the Finns. Left guard last year was Lester Cotton, who started 8 games, but will it be him again? Or this year, will it be Isaiah Wynn if he can ever get healthy enough to play? At center last year was Connor Williams, who is currently a free agent that just met with Seattle. Miami's new center, though, is Aaron Brewer, who spent his first 4 years in the league in Tennessee. At right guard, it used to be Robert Hunt, who is now with the Panthers. Now it's Robert Jones, who is entering his 4th year with Miami, but who played sparingly last season. Finally, at right tackle is Austin Jackson, who Miami drafted number 18 overall in 2020. As an offensive unit, the Dolphins were first in total yards. They were first in passing. They were 6th in rushing. They were 2nd in points scored. Unfortunately, they couldn't get out of the wild card round last year, which is what a great offense will do when it's faced with a great defense. Psst, defense wins championships. Notable offensive draft picks this year. In the 2nd round, with pick number 55 overall, they selected offensive tackle Patrick Paul from Houston. In the 4th round, the Finns drafted running back Jalen Wright from Tennessee because having 2 stud running backs and 3 other players named Jalen, Waddle, Phillips, Ramsey, apparently that's just not enough. Let's take a look at the Dolphins D, though, from last year. Linebacker Bradley Chubb led this team last year with 11 sacks, which was tied for 15th. He had 11 tackles for losses, 6 forced fumbles, which was tied for first. He tore his ACL in week 17 last year in a completely pointless, meaningless game that he never should have been in at that point, and I hope he makes a full recovery this season. I look forward to seeing him play again. Defensive end Zach Seiler had his best year as a pro with 10 sacks, which was tied for 22nd, 11 tackles for loss, 1 forced fumble, and an INT. Defensive tackle Christian Wilkins had 9 sacks, which was tied for 28th, and 10 tackles for a loss as well, but he's with the Raiders now. Linebacker Andrew Van Ginkel had 6 sacks and 8 tackles for loss, but he's with the Vikings now. Cornerback Jalen Ramsey only played in 10 games last year due to a torn meniscus in his first season with the Finns, but was still able to pull in 3 interceptions. And linebacker Jalen Phillips, in his 3rd year in the league, was able to play in only 8 games last year due to a torn Achilles, but still managed 6.5 sacks and 1 interception. So right off the bat, this defense sounds like it has a bunch of question marks. Miami runs a base 3-4 defense with Seiler at the left defensive end position. And this year they got old man Calais Campbell, who's going to start at this season at 38 years old. Last year he had 6.5 sacks and 1 forced fumble with the Falcons. Sadly enough, 6.5 sacks was top for Atlanta. He led the entire defense with 6.5 sacks. I think Calais Campbell was looking for a retirement home in Miami, and then the Dolphins saw him and just decided to sign him. At nose tackle, Miami has Neville Gallimore, who spent the last 4 years with the Cowboys. He had 1 sack and 8 solo tackles last year, and he played in all 17 games.
You suck!
At outside linebacker, I already mentioned Chubb and Phillips. At inside linebacker, there's David Long Jr. entering his 2nd year with Miami. He recorded 63 solo tackles, which was tied for 63, ironically. 1 sack and 1 forced fumble. And Anthony Walker Jr., who spent the last 3 years in Cleveland, where he played only 15 games combined in the last 2 years due to injuries. It sounds like he'll fit right in with the Finns. Why don't you just pick up some more injury or old players for your defense? In the defensive backfield, they have a new cornerback, Kendall Fuller, who spent the last 4 years in Washington. Last year, he had 2 INTs and 9 passes defended. Jalen Ramsey is on the other side. And at the safety positions, they have newly acquired 33-year-old Jordan Poyer, who spent the last 7 seasons with division rival Buffalo Bills. He had 101 tackles, total tackles last year, 1 sack and 1 forced fumble. And then there's Javon Holland, who Miami picked 36th overall in 2021. Holland played in only 12 games last year due to an MCL sprain and a concussion. Overall, last year, the Dolphins D was amazingly somehow 10th in total yards, 15th in passing yards, 7th versus the run, and 22nd in points allowed. They were also tied for 8th in total takeaways, tied for 14th in interceptions, and 3rd in team sacks. Notable defensive players drafted last year were edge Chop Robinson from Penn State with the 21st overall pick. He will probably see playing time sooner than later with the injuries to Miami's outside linebacking crew. I think selecting Chop at number 21, though, was a pretty big stretch out of desperation, as I had Chop going number 29 to the Lions. I did have the Finns drafting an edge because it is a need of theirs, obviously, but I had them selecting Jared Verse, who, unfortunately for them, went 2 picks earlier at number 19. In the 5th, they went edge again with Muhammad Kamara from Colorado State, which just goes to prove that they need a lot of help at outside linebacker, and they're not very confident in the crew that they currently have. Overall draft grade for the Dolphins, I give them a C. Thought they could have traded back if they really wanted Chop Robinson. They could have probably traded back 5 or 6 spots and still got him. They could have picked up some more draft equity in the process. They could have gotten a little bit better draft going for themselves. They went offensive tackle in the 2nd round, no picks in the 3rd, running back in the 4th, which they didn't need, and then edge again. So kind of a confusing draft on their part. That's why they're getting a C. Strength of schedule this year for Miami is a little bit tougher. Still only a .488 winning percentage from their opponents from last year, which is tied for 24th most difficult or 9th easiest, however you want to look at it. I still don't see them matching their 2023 record, though. Let's take a look at the Dolphins' schedule for this year and see how they're going to fare. They've got week 1. They are opening up the season at home against Jacksonville. That's a win. They've got Buffalo in week 2 at home, and that's a win. Week 3, they're at Seattle, and I think we're going to give them a win there too. I think they're just a little bit better than Seattle is this year, but that is going to be a very close game for Miami. And then week 4, they're back home again against Tennessee, and that's going to be a win. Week 5, I think they stumble a little bit. It's a division rival, New England, and I think they're going to lose that one. Going into week 6 is their bye week, and they are 4-1. Not a bad way to start off the season. Coming off of the bye, they're at Indianapolis, and I'm going to give them the win there just because they're coming off the bye. They've got Arizona at home for a win. Then they're at Buffalo for a loss. Then they go to LA Rams for another loss. When they get back home the next week, they've got Las Vegas at home. There's a win. New England at home. There's a win. And then the following week, they have Green Bay on a Thursday night football game, and I think they're going to lose that one only because it's at Green Bay. The next week, they've got the Jets at home. There's a win there. At Houston is a loss the following week. San Fran at home, I'm going to give them the loss. I think San Fran is just going to be a better team this year than Miami is. At Cleveland the following week, I gave them a win there. They could actually maybe even lose that game at Cleveland depending on who's still in the playoff hunt. I think both teams could probably be in the playoff hunt in week 17. And then they wrap up the season at the New York Jets with another loss. So the over-under for the Miami Dolphins in 2024 is 9.5. I'm saying that they're going to go 10-7. So I would go over on this one. I think they finished 10-7 on the year. I think that's the ceiling this year, though. It wouldn't shock me if they went 8-9. They could lose to Seattle. They could lose at Cleveland. This team is just already so banged up and so old, and the season hasn't even started yet. It looks like it has the writing of a disappointing season just waiting to happen already. But that's Miami. Next up, let's look at the New York Jets. Last year, they finished with an amazing 7-10 record. No, I'm not being sarcastic. There's no sarcasm here. There's no joke. Their quarterbacks were so bad. Terrible. I actually had to go back and double check that they actually won 7 games. I said that they would go 12-5, but obviously I thought that they would also have Aaron Rodgers behind center for more than 4 snaps. The Jets' strength of schedule last year had an opponent's winning percentage of .502, which was 17th in the league, and it looks like that should be the starting point for 2024 as well. At quarterback is Aaron Rodgers, who will be 41 years old in December and had more ruptured Achilles last year than completed passes. What? Too soon? Behind Rodgers this year is 35-year-old journeyman quarterback Tyrod Taylor, who spent the last 2 years with the Giants, so he shouldn't have had to move, which is probably nice for him. At running back is third-year man Breece Hall, who played all 17 games last year opposed to his 7 games in his rookie season, and rushed for 994 yards, which was 13th, at 4.5 yards per carry, which was tied for 15th. He had 7 rushes of 20 yards or more, which was tied for 6th, and 5 rushing touchdowns, which was tied for 21st. The wide receiver corps consists of another third-year man, Garrett Wilson, who had 95 receptions, which was tied for 14th, 1,042 yards, which was 22nd, and 3 touchdowns. Wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3 are up for grabs this year, though. It will either be Mike Williams, who spent the last 7 years with the Chargers, but only played in 3 games last year due to a torn ACL, or it could be second-year man Xavier Gibson, who was in his rookie season last year, had only 21 receptions for 229 yards and 0 touchdowns, or will it be Allen Lazard, who had 23 receptions, 311 yards, and 1 touchdown last year? I don't see a really great pick here, so it'll be up to Rodgers to really elevate whatever wide receivers are there and elevate this passing game. At tight end is Tyler Conklin, who every other analyst said was going to be replaced by Brock Bowers, which I thought was the single most annoying and stupid take.
Morons, your bus is leaving.
Tyler Conklin had 61 receptions last year, which was 11th for tight ends, for 621 yards, which was 13th for tight ends. Didn't have any touchdowns. But can you imagine what he would have done if he would have had a decent quarterback throwing him the ball? Come on, man. The offensive line for the Jets was interesting to say the least. They had 9 linemen last year who played in games at 2 or more positions, and they couldn't really get any consistency. At left tackle, they had Mekhi Becton for 16 games, but he's with the Eagles now. This year, they have Tyrone Smith, who will be 34 years old in December and spent the last 13 seasons in Dallas. At left guard, they had Laken Tomlinson for 17 games, but now he's with the Seattle Seahawks. This year, they have John Simpson, who played very well in Baltimore last year, outside of all the penalties anyway. At center, they still have Joe Tippmann, who will be entering his second season with the team, being drafted in the second round at number 43 last year in the 2023 draft. At right guard will be fourth-year man Elijah Vera Tucker, who started in 5 games last year, and that was it. The Jets selected Vera Tucker at number 14 in the 2021 draft. Finally, at right tackle, the Jets brought back 33-year-old Morgan Moses, who was on the team, went to Baltimore. He was there for 2 years, played admirably, and now he's back with the Jets. Overall, last year, the Jets' offense was 31st in total yards, 30th in passing yards, 22nd in rushing, 29th in points scored. One of the worst offenses in the NFL, and they still managed to win 7 games. That's just unbelievable. Notable offensive players drafted for the Jets this year: offensive tackle Olu Fashanu at pick number 11, not Brock Bowers. I had the Jets taking offensive tackle Talisi Fuaga, but only because I had Fashanu going number 9 to the Bears, so this was a great pick for the Jets. In the third round, they selected wide receiver Malachi Corley at number 65 overall from Western Kentucky. And in the fourth round, they selected a running back, Braylon Allen, at number 134 overall. He comes from the Washington Huskies. Now let's take a look at the defensive side of the ball, as I'm sure that we can all imagine at this point the Jets' defense is what kept them in most of their games last year. Some of their key playmakers were outside linebacker Bryce Huff, who had 10 sacks, which was tied for 22nd, and 10 tackles for a loss, but he took off for Philly this year. Defensive end Jermaine Johnson had 7.5 sacks and 11 tackles for a loss, which was tied for 39th, 1 INT, 1 forced fumble. Defensive tackle Quentin Jefferson had 6 sacks for the Jets last year, but he's in Cleveland now. However, they still have defensive tackle Quinnen Williams, who had 5.5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, and 1 INT. They also have outside linebacker Quincy Williams, who finished last year with 95 solo tackles, which was 5th in the league, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, an interception, and 10 passes defended. Other playmakers were safety Jordan Whitehead, who had 4 interceptions, which was tied for 7th, 9 passes defended, and 3 tackles for a loss, but he flew south to Tampa Bay to play for the Bucs. And safety Tony Adams, who's still with the team, had 3 INTs, which was tied for 25th, 5 passes defended, and 55 solo tackles. So the Jets run a base 4-3 defense with third-year man Jermaine Johnson, who I mentioned before, that the Jets drafted at number 26 overall in 2022. The other defensive end this year will be Hassan Riddick, who spent the last 2 years in Philly, where he accumulated 11 sacks, which was tied for 15th, 13 tackles for a loss, which was tied for 23rd, and a forced fumble. At the defensive tackle positions is the aforementioned Quinnen Williams, entering his 6th year with the Jets after being drafted 3rd overall in 2019. And then there's newcomer Javon Kinlaw, who spent the last 4 years with the 49ers, where he had 3.5 sacks last year and not a lot of anything else. At outside linebacker, I mentioned Quincy Williams already, who returns for his 4th year in New York, and Jamian Sherwood, who's entering his 4th year with the Jets when he didn't do a whole lot last year either. At middle linebacker is 32-year-old C.J. Mosley, who will be starting his 5th year with the Jets and had 80 solo tackles, which is tied for 21st, and over 150 total tackles for his 3rd consecutive year, along with a half a sack, 2 forced fumbles, and 1 interception. In the backfield for the Jets is cornerback Sauce Gardner, who had a bit of a sophomore slump after winning Defensive Rookie of the Year in 2022. He only tallied 1 INT and 56 total tackles, but he did have 12 passes defended, which was good enough to be tied for 23rd. At the other corner is DJ Reed in his third year with the Jets, who had pretty basic stats last year with 1 INT, 1 forced fumble, and 9 passes defended. At the safeties, our third-year man, Tony Adams, who I mentioned before, and Chuck Clark, who was unable to play last year after tearing his ACL in the preseason. Overall, the Jets defense was third in total yards allowed. They were second in passing yards allowed. But I guess when you're 25th in rushing yards allowed, other teams don't really need to pass on you that much. They were also 12th in points allowed, tied for 8th in total takeaways and in interceptions, and they were 7th in team sacks. Notable defensive players taken in this year's draft? None. They used their first 5 picks all on offense, which I can't say that I blame them. If you look at the overall stats on the offense and the defense, that's what they needed to do. They needed to address the offense. Draft grade this year as a whole, I'd give them a B minus. They got one stud player in offensive tackle, Fashanu, and then they went wide receiver, running back, quarterback, another running back, and then cornerback in the 5th, and then a safety in the 7th. They started off with a bang, but really fizzled quickly in the draft. It looked like it was going to be a really exciting draft, but it was not. The strength of schedule this year for the Jets is tied for 12th toughest, with opponents having a combined winning percentage of 505 last year. They're right up there with the Cowboys, Rams, and 49ers. But let's take a look at their schedule. We're going to go game by game and predict the final record for the Jets in 2024. New York opens up with a loss at San Francisco, and they've got a really hard schedule, unfortunately, in the beginning of the year. So get this. They start on Monday night at San Francisco, which is going to be a loss. Then 6 days later, they have to play on Sunday at Tennessee, which I still think that they're going to win. But then 4 days later, they have a Thursday night game with New England at home. And we're going to give them a win there just because it's New England. But they literally play all of those games within almost a 2-week time period. Week 4, got Denver at home. That's going to be a win. And then week 5, overseas against Minnesota is going to be a win as well. They come back home, Monday Night Football against Buffalo. There's a win. Then they're at Pittsburgh for a loss, at New England for a loss, Houston at home, Thursday Night Football. That's going to be an exciting game. I'm going to give them the win there. At Arizona for a win, Indianapolis at home for a win, and they've got the bye week in week 12, and I think they're 8-3 at that point in time. When they get off the bye, they've got Seattle at home, which is a win, at Miami for a loss, at Jacksonville for a loss. They've got the Rams at home for a win. They're at Buffalo for a loss. And then they've got Miami the last game of the year, which I think that they're going to pull off because it's at home. It's a win. There's going to be playoff implications there. And I think they're going to pull that one off. So overall, what you've got with the New York Jets, the over-under this year was at 9.5, and I have them at 11-6. The Jets didn't make any changes to their main coaches. They still have head coach Robert Saleh, defensive coordinator Jeff Ulrich, and offensive coordinator Nathaniel Hackett. They're also getting some key pieces back this year and made a few more upgrades in the offseason. So I don't see 11-6 as a reach. We'll see how that plays out, though, if everybody can stay healthy. Last but not least, even though they will probably finish last in the division, possibly last in the conference, maybe even last in the entire NFL, it's the New England Patriots. Wow. What a difference a few years can make. Although, if you're like me, you're kind of getting tired of seeing the Patriots in the Super Bowl every freaking year anyway, so I'm not really complaining about it. Last year, the Patriots went 4-13. I said that they were going to go 8-9. I had no idea that Mac Jones, who is now a backup in Jacksonville, would be as bad as he was. And the organization failed to get him any meaningful weapons to help him out, like DeAndre Hopkins, when they had the chance. Their strength of schedule was up there, facing opponents with winning percentage of .522, which was tied for 9th. But in the end, it was just time for Billy B to ride off into the sunset with his girlfriend, who's like 50 years younger than he is.
Hey, creepy!
It's okay, though. I'm sure she's with him for his charming personality. Anyway, let's take a downfield read at what you can expect from the New England Patriots this year. At quarterback, they still have Bailey Zappi, who was, atrocious. Is that the best word for it? He was awful last year. And they added Jacoby, who turns 32 in December, and he came over from the Washington Commanders. Brissett only played in 3 games last year because he couldn't even beat out Sam Howell, who got the boot from Washington and is now a backup in Seattle. So the name that you're looking for right now is Drake May, who the Pats took number 3 overall in this last draft in April. May wasn't just the third player selected overall, but he was also the third quarterback selected overall, coming from the North Carolina Tar Heels. May completed just 63.3% of his passes for 3,608 yards, 24 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. It's not like they had that tough of a schedule last year either. If you think about who the North Carolina Tar Heels play, they only played 2 ranked opponents last year. At least they went 1-1 in the process. Running back, Ramondre Stevenson, who for whatever reason got a contract extension for 4 years for $36 million. Last year was his third year with the Patriots and only played in 12 games. Again, for the second time in 3 years, due to a high ankle sprain this time. Before his early exit to the season, he rushed for 619 yards, averaging 4 yards per carry and having 4 rushing touchdowns. At wide receiver, it honestly doesn't get any better. There's Kendrick Bourne entering his 4th year in New England, who only played 8 games due to a torn ACL, but somehow he also got a contract extension, 3 years for $33 million this offseason. There's Demario Douglas, who was a rookie last year and caught 49 passes for 561 yards, no touchdowns. And then they brought in KJ Osborne, who came over from the Minnesota Vikings, where he spent the last 3 years. Last year, KJ had 48 receptions for 540 yards and 3 touchdowns. The Pats also drafted Jalen Polk from Washington in the 2nd round with the 37th overall pick in the draft this last April. Last year, Polk had 69 receptions for 1,159 yards and 9 touchdowns for the Huskies. New England also picked up Juju Smith-Schuster. And if this isn't starting to sound like the island of misfit toys, I don't know what does. Is it too late for them to make a play on Brandon Ayuk, Devontae Adams, anybody really? At tight end is Hunter Henry entering his 4th year with the Pats, who only played 14 games last year before being placed on the IR with a knee injury. And you guessed it, he got a contract extension too. Henry had 42 receptions, which was 23rd for tight ends, 419 yards, which was 22nd for tight ends, and 6 touchdowns, which was actually tied for 2nd for tight ends. Looking at the Patriots' offensive line from last year, and you could have probably guessed that they faced some challenges, to say the least, due to injuries and the inability to start a consistent lineup. At left tackle, they had Trent Brown, who only started 8 games and is now with the Bengals. This year, it's Chukwuma Okorafor, who spent the last 6 seasons in Pittsburgh. At left guard, last year is and was Cole Strange, who the Pats drafted number 29 overall in 2022. Strange played in 10 games last year and is currently on the active PUP list with that same knee injury from last year. At center was David Andrews, who spent the last 7 years with the Patriots and started every game last year, but is also currently on the active PUP list with an undisclosed injury. He might take a back seat to Jake Andrews, who was drafted in the 4th round of 2023 and saw extensive playing time last year. At right guard is Saidi So, who New England drafted also in the 4th round of 2023 and was one of the top performers that the Patriots had. The right tackle is Mike Onwenu, who moved from guard to tackle successfully and entering his 5th year in New England. I got to tell you, if I'm a quarterback in New England right now, I'm absolutely terrified at what I'm looking at in front of me here with all of the banged up people and moved around players. As an offensive unit, New England was 30th in total yards, 28th in passing yards, 26th in rushing, 31st in points scored. Notable offensive draft picks, as I mentioned before, Drake May was picked 3rd overall, and if he doesn't start immediately, he will be the starter soon enough. In the 2nd round, they drafted wide receiver Jalen Polk at number 37, who will also be a contributor, especially considering who else is in that wide receiver group. In the 3rd round, the Pats drafted offensive tackle Caden Wallace from Penn State at number 68. In the 4th, they had 2 picks and drafted offensive guard Layden Robinson at number 103 from Texas A&M and wide receiver Javon Baker from UCF at number 110. Looking at the defensive side of the ball for the Patriots, they had just a few playmakers, but they were able to retain all of them for the upcoming season. Defensive end Christian Barmore had 8.5 sacks, which was tied for 33rd, and 13 tackles for a loss, which was tied for 23rd, and 1 forced fumble. Nobody on the entire Pats team had 5 or more sacks, except for him. Outside linebacker Anthony Jennings had 14 tackles for a loss, which was tied for 16th, and 1.5 sacks, and nobody else on the entire New England defense had 8 or more tackles for loss. Inside linebacker Jelani Tavai had 110 total tackles, 65 solo, 2 forced fumbles, 2 interceptions, and a sack. And safeties Jabril Peppers and Kyle Duggar had 2 interceptions each, 8 passes defended, and 1 forced fumble each as well. Even with new head coach Jared Mayo, the Patriots will likely continue to run a base 3-4 defense. This year, that will consist of left defensive end Keon White, who was a rookie last year, selected 46th overall, and had only 26 tackles and 1 sack. And on the other side, at right defensive end, is Christian Barmore, who I mentioned before, entering his 4th season with the Pats after being drafted 38th overall in 2021. At nose tackle is Devon Godshaw in his 4th season in New England, and he will be 30 years old in November. Last year, he had 56 total tackles and 0 sacks. Outside linebackers are maybe Matthew Judon, who has decided to not practice until he gets a new contract. And just the other day, they were caught on the sideline, him and Jared Mayo, in a slight confrontation where Judon just walked away. Last year, he played in only 4 games due to a torn bicep. So why not give the dude a long-term contract like everyone else who got injured last year, right? At the other outside linebacker is Joshua Uche, who is in his 5th year with the Pats, who had only 15 total tackles and 3 sacks last year. Inside linebackers are Jawan Bentley, entering his 7th year with New England. He tallied over 100 tackles for his 3rd year in a row with 4.5 sacks and 1 forced fumble. And then there's Jelani Tave, who I mentioned before, entering his 4th year with the team. In the defensive backfield, the cornerbacks are Christian Gonzalez, who lasted only 4 games in his rookie campaign last year due to a torn labrum in his shoulder, and cornerback Jonathan Jones, who will be 31 this September and starting his 9th year in New England. Last year, Jones had only 40 tackles, 0 interceptions, and 7 passes defended. The safeties have already been mentioned as well. It's 5th year man, strong safety Kyle Duggar, and free safety Jabril Peppers, who were both wildly mediocre last year. Overall, the Patriots were 7th in total yards allowed, 11th in passing yards allowed, 4th in rushing yards allowed, and 15th in points allowed. They were also 24th in total takeaways, 24th in interceptions, and 24th in sacks. Notable defensive draft picks for New England this year was nobody. They went almost all offense as well. And their only defensive selection was cornerback Marcellus Dial from South Carolina in the 6th round at number 180. Their draft grade, however, is a B+. As you could surmise from where they finished on offense and defense overall, the offense was the glaring issue for the Patriots last year, and they addressed it, hopefully getting their quarterback of the future and some weapons to go with him. The strength of schedule for New England this year, it doesn't get any easier. They're tied for 8th toughest schedule, facing opponents who last year had a winning percentage of .512. This is going to hurt Patriots fans a lot more than it hurts me, but let's take a walk through their 2024 schedule. The Patriots open up the year at Cincinnati for a loss. Then they come back home and play Seattle for a loss. They're on the road again Thursday Night Football against the Jets, which I already covered is going to be a loss. And then they go on the road to San Francisco, which is going to be a loss. Starting out 0-4, not very good. They get Miami at home. Let's give them the win there. But then they've got Houston at home, and we're going to go loss. Then they're overseas to play Jacksonville, and I'm giving them the loss there because that will be the 2nd week that Jacksonville will be overseas, so there won't be any kind of acclimation that they'll have to do. They're going to be there. They're going to be ready. They're going to hand New England another loss. New England comes back home from playing overseas, home game against the Jets, which they're going to win, and then they go on the road at Tennessee. Could be a win, but I'm going to give them a loss. I think Tennessee is just a smidge better than the Patriots are this year. At Chicago is a loss. The Rams at home is a loss. At Miami is a loss. Indianapolis at home is a loss. And at the bye week, it's not looking good. You're 2-11 at the bye week. At Arizona is a loss. At Buffalo is a loss. You got the Chargers coming in. They might be in the playoff hunt there. That's a loss. And then Buffalo at home. I mentioned this before when talking about Buffalo. I think New England sneaks a game out of there, and they'll take that one as a win. So they finished last year 4-13. The over-under this year is 5.5. I'm going to go 3-14. Yeah, well, look at it this way. At least you could trade that first overall pick next year to someone who will need a quarterback. This is truly a rebuild year for New England. I have no faith in new head coach Jared Mayo. I don't think he'll last long. They also have a new offensive coordinator in Alex Van Pelt, who was the offensive coordinator in Cleveland from 2020 till 2023. They also have a new defensive coordinator with DeMarcus Covington, who was an internal promotion with the team from their D-line coach position, but he'll be taking over for Matt Patricia, who had been the defensive coordinator since 2017. Needless to say, the AFC East should be mostly exciting again this year. I hope that you all enjoyed this show. As always, please like, share, comment, subscribe. And again, I'm on Facebook, I'm on X, YouTube, Spotify. My web address is www.downfieldread.com. So follow on everything so that you don't miss a thing. Thank you for taking this downfield read with me. Until next time, I am Jeff D. Have a good one, everyone.